Greetings hobbyists, this is Artans of Vol, and in this video we're going to be making a sci-fi hand flamer. So it's been a while since we've made something from scratch on the channel. I did make a lightsaber a few videos ago, but that was specifically to show what the add-on ND could do, and every so often I like to make something that shows off basically a full workflow. So let's just delete out that cube and we'll get ready to go. Now before we start, I will use some add-ons during this. I'll mention them as we go, and there's going to be nothing here that you couldn't do manually in some way or another, but we just like to do things more efficiently. There are links to all those add-ons in the description, both free and paid for, and the paid for ones have a tendency to be affiliate links, which does help support the channel, which is always really appreciated. Now we are going to skip a slight stage in this. I'm just going to bring up my asset browser, and I'm going to bring in the hand that I'm going to be using from the asset browser. Let's get rid of that. Now, this is mostly being just done to save time and because I don't like too much repetition on the channel, and I've got several videos where I've made things like handles before as part of another weapon project. So you've got two options of how to get this. Firstly, at any level on the Patreon, if you sign up to it, you'll get this hand, and you can download that to use for any projects, both personal and commercial. Alternatively, you could watch one of the other videos I've done which looks at making a weapon, which will include how to create something like a handle. So whether you're happy putting a couple of dollars in to support the channel, or if you can't justify spending any money at the moment, then there's obviously those free options available. Now, straight away I want to point out that I've got this face with the origin centered on it. Now that's really helpful because it's going to help center our object that we're going to put here. I'm going to start by making sort of the under section of the flamethrower, and that's normally what I start with, the bit that's going to be attached to the hand. So we're just going to shift and A, mesh, and we'll bring in a cube. I'm going to shift click on that and press Alt and A, and that's going to use machine tools to align it. You could do that manually if you choose to, and then I'm just going to G and Z that up so it's right in line with the top of the hand. Then we're just going to go into vertex mode. Let's bring this back, so let's G and Y somewhere to maybe about there, and we'll bring this forward. So each time I'm just Shift and Z to go into X-ray mode, and let's bring that a bit forward, maybe about there. It's a hand flamer, so it doesn't need to be massive, and then let's just G and Z that up. Now we can change anything we want to as we go through this. Now if I just bring out the end panel over here, if I look at the item menu, we haven't actually scaled anything in object mode. That would be doing this, so everything's still as 1 because we did it in edit mode. But you might need to press Ctrl and A and apply the scale if any of that doesn't say 1. Let's have a look at the thickness, and actually that's probably about right for thickness. We can always come and edit any of these things later. So let's get started. I want to make something that's going to go in front of the hand, just as a little bit of protection for the finger, but also where there's going to be some sort of fuel canister here. So let's go into edge mode, Control and R, and I'm just going to bring that about in line with the hand, and then we'll go into face mode. I'm using machine tools for this pie menu. It just makes it a bit more visible. You don't have to use machine tools for that if you don't want, but it is a great add-on. And then I'm just going to press E to extrude that down to maybe about there. Yeah, we can always fiddle with this. Then we're going to cut out the section that we don't want to be here to give it a bit more of an interesting shape. So I'm going to press Alt and W to activate box cutter, and then we'll press D and we'll change that to an Engon type object. Let's click and drag somewhere there. Let's go with there, and then come to here, double click, drag that through, and then I'm going to press B to add in a bevel, and I'm just going to scroll that up so it's nice and smooth. And I'm going to go somewhere about there, but we can always change that if we want to, but I think that's quite a nice shape. Then we want to change this back section so it's a little bit more interesting. We've got two methods of doing that. I can come here and then just Control and B and put in something like a chamfer. That could look quite nice. Actually, let's do that a little bit more. So that's one thing we could do, and I could do the same thing on the top. Now you'll notice I'm doing this destructively, so I'm going to go somewhere about there. The reason I'm doing this destructively is I don't really care about editing it later. If I go into face mode and click and then press Y, I've got mesh machine, and if I use mesh machine then I can go and change width at any point that I want to. So I don't need to worry about this being a destructive process. Effectively, mesh machine makes our bevels pretty much as if they're a non-destructive process. Now if I don't want to do that, let's go back. I can use ND, which is the add-on I use when making a lightsaber, and normally you'd press F, but I've changed the shortcut keys to Shift and F, and then we can just go to an edge bevel there, drag that out to somewhere there, let's say, and click, and that's made a specific bevel modifier that's going to have that. So up to you how you do that. I'll leave that like that for now. Now I think I want to deal with the armored part of this. I want something going over this to protect the sort of inner workings of this hand flamer. So let's Shift and A, mesh, and bring in another cube. In fact, let's just click on this, Shift and S, and again, this is from Machine Tools, but you can get your origin to move to an object by using other options. For example, object and then snap, but I think it's a lot quicker to be able to snap to there, and then Shift A, mesh, and then cube, and then let's just scale that up a bit. Let's have a look on the side, maybe a bit less than that, somewhere there. Let's G and Z that up. And I don't want this going all the way down. I think that's going to be a bit boring, so let's leave a bit of a gap. And then vertex mode, oops, W, get out of box cutter. Let's G and then Y that back to maybe there. That looks all right. And then we'll G and then Y these forward to just a little bit further forward. And then, what am I going to do with this? I think I actually like that there. Let's stick with that for now, but I'm going to come back to this object behind, go into vertex mode. I'm just going to G and Z that up. So we've got a bit of that showing there. Then I'm going to go back into this bevel, which we've got there, and I can change the width of it so that we've got it like this armored part goes over this back section. Now, to make this look a little bit nicer, I think we want to mimic this shape. So what I'm going to do is press Alt and Q. That just changes objects, so I can go back to the original one and then back to this one. It stops you going out into object mode, clicking, go back into edge mode. It's really tedious. Just Alt and Q, way easier. I'm going to select that edge and I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. So I'm going to Shift and F and I'm going to put in an edge bevel, and that's going to be, let's just say somewhere there. And then again, we can fiddle with that amount if we want to. So I think that will look interesting. Yeah, maybe I'll go into vertex mode, select those, and then G and then Y that all along a bit. Yeah, that looks cool. Let's go with something like that. Now, just for part of the aesthetic that I'm going for, I want to add a little sort of front shield thing. I don't really know what it's for. I just know that in what I'm talking about, we often have this. So what I'm going to do is go into this one. We'll go into edge mode. I'm going to press Control and R. And notice if this was a destructive chamfer here, I wouldn't be able to use the edge cut tool. But at the moment, because this is just a modifier, this is still thinking this is perfectly quads, which is great. It solves a lot of problems. So I'm going to go there, and then that's probably about right. And then let me think how I'm going to work this. Right, let's press Control and R, and we're going to do another one, let's say there, and then I'm going to, let's / to isolate this, Control and R there, and then Control and B to widen that to maybe there. Let's have a look at how this looks. So what I'm going to do is go into face mode, I'm going to select this face, and then I'm going to G and then Z that up. And we get this really cool, interesting shape. Now, we've automatically got a problem here, and what's really funny is how Blender's interpreted this. You can see because I've got cavity turned on, that is just, if I come across here in the options, cavity, it's also what gives this really cool looking color system, that we can see that Blender has automatically creased these shapes, and hilariously it's creased them in like the opposite way. So we've got one being creased this way and one being creased that way. Now, we sort of need to decide which one we prefer. Let's just go into face mode, actually, and then G and Z that up a bit more. Now, that's going to be entirely up to you, but the problem is if I go to 3D print this is for 3D printing, at the moment, it will interpret this in these different ways. And I actually think I want it this way. So what I'm going to do is go into vertex mode there, and I'm going to hit 2, because I've got Machine Tools Smart Vert activated. If you don't, click, click, and J. It's not a lot more work, but it just means that you have to go further across your keypad. It just takes a tiny little bit more longer, and therefore it's a tiny little bit less efficient. Let's just 2 there as well to join those. Okay, so out of isolation mode, let's have a look at this, and actually I don't think this is high enough. So vertex mode, let's just G and then Z that a little bit higher, somewhere like that. Yeah, pretty happy with that. And then I want to bring a section of this forwards, so I'm actually going to have to use the knife tool. So again, because we've got machine tools, I can press 2 to activate the knife tool. Otherwise, I could have just pressed K. I'm going to click there. I'm going to then go with X to lock it to the X axis, click, and then space to confirm. I'm going to go into face mode and select those. And then I'm just going to E to extrude those forward. Something like that. Okay. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Quite happy with that. Would this be cool if that bottom one's chamfered? Let's have a look. I think this might actually cause more problems than it's worth. Maybe not. Yeah, I like that. And it's going to help with the 3D printing as well, potentially, if we had that point facing down, which I don't think we're going to, but just in case. So there we go. We've got a nice, interesting shape on that, and I just think that chamfer adds a nice, tiny little bit of detail. Right, so there we go. We've got this looking pretty nice. Right, so we need to add the front to this, so let's just make a makeshift placement for where that's going to be. I'm going to bring in a cylinder there. Let's up our vertices to, I don't know, 128. That should be small enough. G and Z that up. Let's R, and then on the X-axis to rotate it, 90. So it's facing us, and then let's just G and then bring that forward somewhere there. This is probably a bit too big, actually. Realistically, do we want that much fuel going into it? Probably not. So that's probably more right. We can fiddle with that later as well. But the important thing is that it's relatively centered to our weapon. Okay, what's next? I think we need the fuel canister. I think that's going to determine a lot about the size of this. So again, we just want a cylinder. We've got 128. That should still be enough. And let's just scale that up. Now, what I'm going to do is actually rotate this, because I think I want this basically in that direction, somewhere about there. Now, if we want to, if I go to item, we can see this rotation here. It's rotated at 35, well, about 35. Let's change that to exactly 35. Do I want that more? I think 45 is too much. I like 35. I think that's looking quite nice. But importantly, we're not going to apply this rotation. So Control and A, if you apply the rotation, that's going to go to 0 and it's going to cause problems later. We don't want to do that. The reason why is I still want to scale this. So if I S and then Z, if I hit Z again, so that's hitting Z twice, it will now deform in the Z axis local to this object. And because we know the rotation, we know that the Z axis is at 35 degrees, or I say we do, Blender does. So this solves a lot of problems. Right, now we've got our scale a bit messed up, so we are going to Control and A and apply the scale, go into edge mode, and then I'm just going to select that edge, and I'm going to bevel this. So let's Control and B, go to somewhere there, and I want this nice and rounded, and I'm going to up this to be pretty excessive. We've got the segments in the top left hand corner. Let's go to about 32, and I'm just going to hold down Control, and I'm just going to go to about, actually, do I want it more about there? I quite like that. Let's go with that. Okay, we'll stick with that for now. No, I've changed my mind. I don't like that. Right, Control and B, let's go there. What I'm actually going to do is press P to change the profile a bit, and I actually want that a bit more like, instead of being there, a bit more like that. There we go. That looks quite nice. Then we're going to add in some detailing. Let's go into vertex mode. I'm just going to select all of these vertex at the bottom, and then G and then Z and Z again to get that a little bit wider. And then I'm going to Control and R. There, escape, Control and B, drag that all the way down, and this is going to be our sort of detailing on our cylinder. So go into face mode, let's alt click there, shift and alt click there, and I'm going to use hard ops, so I'm going to press Q and then alt click here macro to bring that out a little bit wider. There we go. Now, just so you know, I'm just really used to doing it that way. You can do this with Alt and E and then extrude faces along normals. I'm just used to the hard ops way just so much. Edge mode again. Let's select that edge, and that one, and let's Control and B and just bevel those. Ooh, maybe a chamfer would look nicer there. What do we think? Chamfer or bevel? Oh, actually I should Control and B, and then I need to press P to change the profile, and the profile needs to be 0.5 because we had it on that earlier. I'm actually going to change that here, so 0.5 to make that rounded. I think I like the rounded option more than the chamfer, so we're going to stick with that. And let's, is that long enough? No, I don't think it is. So I'm just going to press C, just so I can quickly select all of those, and then G, and then ZZ. Somewhere about there, and that's going to give me some chance to do a little bit of freehand when painting. Let's bring that there. Right, we need to add something so it's going to connect to the flamer and put in all the fuel. So let's shift A, mesh, and bring in a cylinder again. Let's go to there. We want this at the same angle, so we're going to Alt and A. And if I come into X-ray mode, you can see, let's do that again. Alt and A, it flips here, and machine tools align keeps the rotation. So now this object is also at 35. So let's scale that down a bit. G and then ZZ. And we've got something like that. Okay, let's have a look at that. Maybe a bit less of a gap. Now, at the moment, I'm not sure if I'm totally happy with this angle. So let's Q, this is using hard ops, and ever scroll, select that object, let's go to vertex mode, and I can always just grab this, and let's just G, and then Y, and I can move this around to see if I want it somewhere else. I think about there. Yeah, I'm not sure how different that is, but it just seems to feel a little bit better. Let's just G and move that in slightly. Cool. Okay, so I think that's the placement for our fuel canister. Again, I'm not sure if this is too big or not. We can always change that later because we haven't booleaned anything together. Now, I want some detailing here. I imagine that this is actually fairly pressurized, but just for some detailing, something cool, I'd quite like there to be another pressurizing system here. So actually what I'm going to do is Shift and D to duplicate this. I'm going to come here and rotate it by 90, and then let's just G, let's just scale that down a bit. Let's just bring it out to the side, and then we could have this being basically a duplicate of this, and it being where all of the fuel is then pressurized a little bit further before being forced out through the flamer nozzle. And what we can do here is, because we don't want this looking exactly the same, and because I was a little bit uncertain before on what I was doing, we could come to, let's go to face mode, we could come here, go to there, and I'm going to use machine tools to change this to a chamfer. So let's go to unfuse, and then we've got our chamfer. And then we'll do the same thing here, Y, and then unfuse, and then we've got our chamfers back, and we've got something looking a little different. Now, what we'll do is we'll just, this isn't perfectly centered, but I'm just going to Alt and X. Oops, this is set to the cursor, I don't know why, and then we're just going to mirror that across. So now we've got those chamfers on both sides. That Alt and X was using hard ops as a mirror. It just makes everything a bit quicker, and it's quite efficient. And let's G and then X that out a bit. Cool. So I think that will add a nice little bit of detail. That is definitely too far though. Let's go with something there. So we've just recycled this to make something a little bit more interesting there. Let's just scale that a little bit more. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that, as it goes some way to mimicking the other elements of the weapon while being still slightly different. And I think we need to mirror this again. So let's Alt X there, after Shift selecting something in the middle, and we'll do that. Oh no, we won't. We will Alt and X, and we need to put this, that this is going to be a new modifier, and then do that. Otherwise it gets confused and thinks we're trying to do something to modify the original mirror. So we wanted to put in a new mirror. There we go. So this is looking pretty good. Now at this point, I don't think I like the idea of this being connected to the armor. The armor should go over this, or sort of around it. So what I'm going to do is Shift and D to make a duplicate of this. Let's isolate this, and let's get rid of some of these elements. So what I'm going to do is, let's think how we can manage this. Right, what I'm going to do is select that edge there, Alt and X to get rid of that, select that edge, Alt and X to get rid of that, same with that one, and then same with that one. Now, that seems to have done something weird. Let's go into edge mode and just delete those edges as well. And then I'm just going to click that edge, shift click that edge, Control and E, and then I'm going to bridge edge loops. And then we can just go into this edge here, which we don't need, and then Alt and X that. That will work out perfectly. Then we can go to object mode, and then we've got that. So what I can do now is just S to scale this up. Let's have a look at how that's going to look. Let's S and then Y to scale that less on the Y. Somewhere around there, I think, and then Control and then minus and then H. And you can see we've got this cool looking cutout where the armor makes way for this fuel canister, or this sort of pressurization part. Now, I think this is going to mean that this needs to come in a little bit to be about there. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, I think that looks really fun. Let's fiddle with that a bit more. Maybe there, but I'm just going to grab those vertices and then G and then Y that in. Yeah, that's better. I think there. Cool. So let's hide that. We've got that detailing. Now this does raise a question of how this armor actually works. If we were doing something a bit more real, I'd probably put a seam down the center here, basically on this bit of armor, so it looks like the armor could be placed on each side. But this is a tiny miniature, so I just don't think that's worth it. But what we will do is add some tiny little rivets to show where that would occur, so that this basically armored plate has been riveted on. Right, now let's have a look at this. Go into that edge there. I'm actually going to Control and B, and then we'll just add something that looks similar in shape, so it again echoes that design. Nice. Right, let's put some rivets in then. So I'm just going to Shift A, Mesh. Do I want rivets sticking out? Or do I want something that's basically looks like a hole where the rivet is internal to this? We've got a lot of things cutting in at this point, so let's just use a quad sphere and have this rivet sticking out. So we're just going to S to make that a bit smaller. Let's go with something round. I'm going to go with 0.4, G to about there, and then let's come here and then G and then X that out. Let's go with somewhere there. Let's Shift and X and mirror that to the other side. So when we duplicate this, so Shift D and then let's Y to bring that down here. We've got everything aligned, and then I'm just going to Shift and D and then Z, and then we've got one up here as well. Cool. I think that's looking pretty nice. Some nice interesting detailing. Right, let's get on with the front. So Shift A, Mesh, and then Cube. Let's bring that to the front here. How do we want this to look? Let's S and Z that to make that a little bit wider. In fact, I think I want the top of this perfectly aligned with that. So I'm going to press G, B to activate Snap Base. That allows me to select certain bits. Importantly, the things that you can click here are controlled by what your snapping is set to. Now, most people have their snapping set to one thing, like vertex, edge, or face. If you hold down Shift, you can snap to multiple different things. And you don't need to turn your snapping on. It's just G, B, and then I'm going to click, I want that edge, Z, and then I'm going to come to this edge so that it is perfectly aligned. Vertex mode. Let's bring this down a little bit. Do I want that in line with that, or do I need a bit more space? Let's G and then Z that down a little bit, and then we'll bring both of these forward. Cool, there. Then I want, is that wide enough? How wide do I want this to be? Let's S and then X that wider. Let's go with something like that, Control and A, and apply the rotation and scale. Then, because I don't know how wide I want this, I'm going to select those, and I'm going to press Shift and F. You just press F, and I'm going to add an edge bevel. We're going to go all the way, and I'm going to press C to clamp that. Then I'm going to press down Alt. You can see that segments are controlled by Alt, and then scroll up. I'm going to make this really round. So let's go to 64, somewhere around there. And we've got that. That should look pretty good. Yes. Happy with that. I think it's too long. Let's G and then Y that back to maybe there. And this cylinder is going to go, we're going to go into vertex mode, and then we're just going to G and then Z that out somewhere there. Control and R, put an edge loop that goes to basically in line, and then I'm going to go into face mode, select that face, S, and we'll scale that down to something like that. Not sure why I didn't just use a chamfer there, but I didn't want this at exactly 45 degrees, so just seemed an alternative way to do it. So this is going to act as a bit of a heat shield. Now, heat shields often have holes in them, so we're going to get some holes cut out of this. Now, what's useful is that our origin here is still perfectly centered to where this bevel sort of starts and stops, because we went as far as we could. So that is going to be useful for us. So I'm just going to Shift and S and bring my cursor to selected. I'm going to Shift A, Mesh, and we're going to bring in another cylinder. Let's down that to 64, which is still quite excessive, but I quite like it to be smooth. Let's R, and then we want to do this in the Y, so by 90. We're going to scale that down to, how big do these holes want to be? Let's go somewhere there so they're visible, and let's G and then X that across there. In fact, I'm going to S and X that so that's a bit bigger, just so it's easier to see. Right, G and then Y that back. Okay, so I think this is where we're going to go with this, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. This is going to be a little bit tricky because what I want is one there, I want another one on the other side. So what I want is this coming across to the other side. Do I boolean this now or later? Let's do it later just because otherwise it will slow down. So what I want is this to have, or basically to arc round. So I want another one here, I want another one over here, and all of this is going to be annoying because we're not going to do it exactly. So we're not going to do it that way. We're going to click, shift click, and we're going to use ND, shift F, and then circular array. I'm going to press W to change the displacement axis. Let's scroll up so we can see what we're doing. Oh no, it's A, sorry, so let's fix that. So we want it there. I want something about like this, but what's really cool is that we can change our angle. So I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to drag that to be only there, and we want that to be minus 180. So let's just hold down Shift. So let's get that to 180, click, and then we've got that just on the top instead of all the way around. How cool is that? Then, because we've got this and we're happy with it, I'm going to apply all of these. So let's QQ and then Smart Apply, and then I can Shift and D and then Y that across to, let's say, somewhere there. Okay, I've just realized I've done this in a silly order, but it's fine. Okay, I'm going to go here, press L, so selected all of that. I'm going to Shift and D and then move that along in the Y-axis, bringing that to about halfway, and then P, and then separate by selection. So now I've got this by itself. And then we want to rotate that, and we're going to have one there, one there. Well, we're going to have one there and one there, so that's 90 apart. So we need to get another 30. So let's go 30 there. So what we're going to have to do is just Shift and D, and then we're going to R, and that's going to be 60, and then Shift and then R to repeat that. Right, so we see we've got those in the middle there. We then need to cut those out. Before we do that, well, let's Shift and D that again, and I'm going to press Alt and R, and then G and then Z that down to about there. Looks about right. Cool, and then I'm going to Alt and X. I should have probably just actually mirrored that one across, but no one cares at this point. That's fine. It was probably actually just the same speed. There, Control and minus, and then we've got all of these bits going in for our holes in our sort of heat vent. That's H. Oh, I seem to have made a duplicate of those at some point, so let's just get rid of that. That's H and H and H, and then finally H. So looking really nice. I think that's going to be pretty interesting in terms of a model. The only problem is that we can see this cylinder that's through the middle, so we're going to deal with that. So I'm going to press there, Control and plus, so we can add this boolean, but what I'm going to do is hide that, and I'm going to bring that boolean all the way to the top. So that boolean will be that boolean there. Let's drag that all the way to the top, and that means that now these will cut out. So it's just going to look a little bit better when we get our print result. Right, so pretty much there. The last thing we need is the thing that sets light to the flamethrower. They always have, I guess it's like a pilot light. Would that be the correct term? Not sure if that's the correct term. It's the term I'm going to use. So I'm just going to Shift and A, Mesh, and then we're going to bring in another cube. Let's just scale that down. Actually, let's just turn that to about 1 millimeter because we just want this to be wide enough that it's still going to print. Let's actually maybe go with, in the X direction, 0.8. That's generally the thinnest I'm happy to print things at. Let's make that a bit smaller. Let's put that over to here. And then we're going to go into vertex mode, G, and then Y that out to about here. Let's G and then Y that bit back a little bit. And then we're just going to Shift and A, Mesh, and bring in another cylinder. S to scale that down a lot. R to rotate it round. Let's keep it nice and consistent. So we're going to go to 30. Oh, no, minus 30. And then let's bring that in here. So let's have a look at this. So we'll need to scale that up. Okay, maybe we are going to have to put this thinner. Let's see how this looks at 0.6. That will probably be fine because it's attached to the upper part. And then we can scale that down a little bit. S and then Z and Z. And then let's go into edge mode. Control and B. Somewhere there. Or actually, let's just make that a little bit thinner. So Alt and W. D, and then we'll get a box. Let's cut that out there. Make sure that there's a slight overlap with this, and then we can actually make that a bit thinner to be about there. And then vertex mode. Let's get out of box cutter. G and then ZZ. Something about there. So that's our pilot light that's going to set off our flamethrower. Right, what have we got to do next? Well, we need something that's going to actually set this light. Do I want to do this? Let's have a look at this. Let's Shift and A, mesh, and I'm going to bring in another cylinder here. Let's R and then Y90. Bring that to, let's say, this side. Let's scale that down. And we're going to have something here that is basically putting out a small amount of fuel that's going to be the pilot light. So let's G and then X that across to there, Control and A, apply the scale, go into edge mode, let's select there, let's put in a chamfer because it's going to look interesting, or maybe, no, let's go with a bevel there, and then we're just going to add in a tube here that's going to be wrapping around to provide the fuel for this. Now, we're going to do a couple of things here to make this more 3D printable. We're going to make sure that it touches as much of these objects as possible so that it has supports, because this is going to be a thin tube. So I'm going to Shift Alt and C, and we're going to use an add-on called Cable Rater, and we're going to create a cable. Right, so I'm going to press Shift and click there because I want it centered. I don't care about this one being centered, so I'm just going to click there, and then I'm going to press S to scale this up a little bit. I'm going to press G to add maybe another few points, and then I'm going to click, and then I'm going to go into edit mode, and I've got loads of points here to manipulate, so I'm just going to G to move that around there, and G to move that one around there. In fact, let's Control and X that one out. I think that's a bit too much. I don't think we need as much there, so let's rotate that around. Let's have that one go inside there, and then we've got this, and it's being just about held up by our canister, and that's just going to look nice. It just looks a little bit more interesting, and don't get me wrong, this isn't perfect. I think this would probably normally go underneath here or be inside the flame unit, but I just think it adds a nice, interesting bit of detail, and if we don't have this, then everything's really internal and it just gets a little bit boring. Let's maybe up the size of this a bit. So I'm just going to Shift Alt and C, edit cable, and then I'm going to press S to just change the width a bit. We'll go to about there, just to make sure that it's going to print okay. Then I'm going to come into my cable, and I want to make sure that we are going to geometry, and we want to fill caps. And then we're going to convert this to a mesh, but not before we up our resolution to, let's say, 12. And we up our resolution here to, let's say, 32. We could have done this, if I just click here, Shift Alt and C, and edit cable, we could have done that within here as well by using F and V. So if I press V and then scroll up, you can see that we're upping our bevel resolution as well. In fact, let's put that to 32. Let's make it nice and smooth. And then I'm going to right click and convert to, and then mesh. And we've got this converted to a mesh. And we just need to go into vertex mode, A, and press 3 to remove some vertices that have problems on the end. Oh, and I do actually need to just select these end vertices and then just bring those into that a little bit, just so there's a little bit of overlap. So there we go. We've got our handheld flamer. Nice bit of detailing or additional detailing here, and we've got that ready to go. Now I've started getting to the point where I'd boolean this together. Normally I'd leave that bit till later, but one thing I would want to do is for this object, apply all of my modifiers, so Q, Q, and then Smart Apply, or you can apply them one at a time. And I want to go into face mode, select that face, I to inset it, E to extrude it in, and then I'm going to Control and B to just round that bit out. But that'll be much nicer to paint, because then we don't have to drill out our barrel. So there we go, there is our hand flamer. And I would say that has just the right amount of detail that you want for something that's going to be 3D printed without having too much detail that it's going to be an absolute nightmare to paint. As I said, if you do want to find any of the add-ons that I've used in this video, they're all linked in the description, as are a couple of other videos that you might find interesting on creating different types of weapons. And finally, there is a link to the Patreon, where if you do want this hand, and in fact this actual whole weapon will be on there as well, you're more than welcome to join up. And as I said, I share these videos a week ahead of time, ad-free, and you get some other great perks as well. Have a great day, guys.